I will continue the same topic that was started last week. The dark night, not of the soul, not of the spirit, but of the senses. And this is an extremely interesting topic for a spiritual life. Of course, I'm relying on the work of our dear St. John of the Cross. It is a blessing to have him as our brother, as our spiritual guide. The last talk I started with the teaching of St. John on this spiritual night. And you remember, he said that beginners, they are somehow full of imperfections. And these imperfections will be removed or transformed by God by the virtue of this most holy dark night of the senses. And then he started to describe these imperfections following the 7 deadly capital sins. We started with pride, and now I will continue with greed, spiritual greed. Imagine how interesting is what he says now. Many beginners also at times possess great spiritual greed. They hardly seem content with the spirit God gives them. They become unhappy and restless because they do not find the consolation they want in spiritual things. And then John starts to describe how this greed, means that they collect like paraphernalia, spiritual paraphernalia like rosaries or other religious or spiritual objects. And then they become attached to them, to their workmanship or their decoration, And then John says that this is contrary to the poverty of spirit. They, according to John, these people become attached to visible instruments and they burden themselves with them. And then John concludes saying that until a soul is placed by God in the passive purification of the dark night, the soul cannot purify itself completely of these imperfections or others. No matter how much individuals do through their own efforts, they cannot purify themselves enough to be disposed in the least for the divine union of the perfection of love. God must take over and purge them in that fire that is dark for them, as we will explain, he says. Allow me to continue. Then John uses the sin of lust. And of course, this sin of lust is the desire, for pleasure. Because these beginners, they try to get pleasure and satisfaction, in these devotions or in these spiritual exercises. Okay, let us keep it like this. Also, these beginners, they fall into the capital vice of anger. Why? Because when the delight and satisfaction given by the spiritual exercises fades away, these beginners are left without any spiritual savor, and because of this distastefulness, they become restless, and usually they are in a very bad mood. After the delight and satisfaction is gone, the sensory part of the soul is naturally left insipid, just as a child is when withdrawn from the sweet breast. Another way that this anger is manifested is when they are angry over the sins of others, because they like to set themselves as lords of virtue. They are full of righteousness, self-righteous people. And John said that this is contrary to spiritual meekness. Another way that they experience this anger is because they grew impatient over their own imperfections. Many of these beginners make numerous plans and great resolutions, but they do not have the patience to wait until God gives them what they need when He so desires. Their attitude is contrary to spiritual meekness and can only be cured by the purification of the dark night. More is said also of a spiritual gluttony that goes more or less in the same lines, that they want to have more and more. They are greedy and they look for satisfaction in prayer. Finally, the imperfection of spiritual envy and sloth. Of course, envy is very much related to pride. Envy means that when I see someone doing well, I feel sad. And on the other hand, when I see someone doing bad, I feel happy. That is envy. And these beginners, of course, they feel like that. When they feel, or when they see other people doing well spiritually, they resent that. They feel sad. And also, in terms of sloth or laziness, they are like that. They are lazy when they have to do something that they don't like, when this that is required from them is unpleasant, because again, they are like stuck in these spiritual delights. So I have been quite fast, because anyone can go to the words of St. John of the Cross and read them in detail. But I want to reflect upon these things because they are so important. And all these things that are referred to us by John of the Cross, of course, they bring us the idea of attachment, purification, mortification. Detachment, to be purified, and also mortification. And I believe that at this point it's important to clearly separate, differentiate, discriminate the attitude towards mortification that is present, if you remember, at the mythic level, from mortification here at the spiritual level. What is mortification at the mythic level? It's a very primitive attitude. It's the idea that I can bargain with God. It is also present not only at the mythic but also at the magical level, even more. The idea is that offering something to the God, something even physical, even parts of my body. You remember that some tribes, of hunters used to offer to God parts of their fingers. Animal sacrifices, even human sacrifices. Then I can get something from God. God will like that. I can win God's favor. That is the idea of the sacrifice. That is the idea of the mortification. I can trade with God. Underlying this practice is the most appalling and horrible belief that God likes when I suffer. That God is happy when human beings are having a painful time. That God likes and enjoys and craves for my suffering. This kind of God is not a God, it's an idol, it's a monster. We cannot believe in that God. So, this idea of mortification, we need to leave it behind. We need to be totally purified from it. God does not like my suffering. God doesn't like my pain. I cannot offer my pain to God thinking that He's going to be happy. In the spiritual life, we can make two very serious mistakes. The first one is like, if I am suffering, if I am having a hard time, then something must be wrong. This is one of the mistakes. I will repeat. If I am suffering, let us say if I am sick, if I am not feeling well, if I have problems at work, if I have problems in other relationships, if my life is not smooth, if I am unhappy, then God is not with me. Something must be wrong. This is a horrible mistake. And this is the mistake that John of the Cross is trying to tell us with his doctrine, with his message of the dark night of the spirit and of the senses. Telling us that actually it is through these extremely painful sometimes, experiences that we go through this process of transformation, of liberation. This is the small death by which God is releasing us from the spiritual childhood, I will say, of these very primitive habits of being proud, of being greedy, of being envious, and so on and so on, John is telling us this message, which is strong. If you are in any kind of trouble, in any kind of sickness, in any kind of death, the message is, be patient. It doesn't mean that you are doing anything wrong. Be patient. God is working. in your night. Allow Him to work. Don't be despondent. Don't be depressed. Don't increase the pain by your anger, by your disappointment. But on the other hand, try to cooperate. How can you cooperate with that? With faith, quiet faith, with gentle patience. In this way, you are not increasing the pain. You are not resisting the pain. You are cooperating with God. God is working there. This small death, as bitter as it is, as disgusting as it is, as unpleasant as it is a must. It's a necessity in the spiritual life. All spiritual writers, all spiritual mystics will say the same. Otherwise, we cannot release from our attachment to the small life. The small life being good, if it is an absolute, then becomes an idol. Let us say, for instance, that my career as a psychologist, okay, is good. It's good, of course, to have a career. It's good to have an interest. It's good to have a call. But if I make of this call, of this career, my absolute, and I sacrifice everything to that, then there is a problem. Then I become over-obsessed, over-attached. And then I am the slave of my own pride, of my own success, etc. That is why sometimes death comes. And death is always unpleasant. But after that you feel the release and the happiness and the liberation. So, this is one of the mistakes. The other mistake, also extremely important, my dear friends, is that if I do not feel, in terms of spiritual life, if I do not feel anything in my prayer, in my devotion, if I do not feel anything, then there must be something wrong. It's not exactly as the other mistake. And I believe that this is also a very and extraordinarily common mistake. That means intensity of feelings, sweetness in prayer, is experienced as closeness to God, as God working in me, as God living in me. On the other hand, lack of feelings, dryness, aridity, is experienced as God is away. God doesn't care about me. God has left me. And John is telling us, please don't think like this. That is so wrong. He's telling us something that also spiritual writers nowadays, they tell as the fallacy. That means the mistake. Fallacy is a mistake. The pre-trans fallacy. Pre-trans fallacy. What does it mean? Okay. Let us see this picture, okay? Pre-trans fallacy. Pre-trans fallacy. That means that we tend to confuse what is pre-rational with trans-rational. Rational is cold, is matter of fact, ideas, is cold, factical, data. And then, of course, emotions is, on the other hand, warm. There is a colorness, there is intensity, is very different from mental ideas, right? From the rational. Also, when we experience God, when we experience the Holy Spirit, there is always some feeling involved. I think I also mentioned in a talk, how this experience of the Holy Spirit is like reading a letter that has been written to you, not to someone else. And then if someone has written this letter to you, like my mother, like my father, then there is feeling. Also, it is a very common experience, for people who started in the charismatics, they have received the experience of the Holy Spirit, that when they read the Bible, there is something new. It is not just a book as before. Now you read the Bible and it is for me. It makes sense. I can see that the Bible is talking to me. There is a new feeling, right? So you see, both the spiritual and the emotional, they are similar. They are similar, different from reason. So because they are similar and also they are different from reason, sometimes they get confused. And this confusion is extremely unfortunate. Let me give you some examples of this confusion so you will understand. Let us say, for instance, that you are in a rock concert or in a football stadium. Being in a crowd, in such a crowd, automatically you experience a high. Especially if it is your favorite band or your favorite team, you experience the high of being surrounded by people because there is a kind of psychic atmosphere. But this psychic atmosphere, attention, has nothing to do with the Holy Spirit. It's a purely human, matter-of-fact phenomenon. But this psychic atmosphere can also happen in a prayer group, or for instance, if you go to TC. Many people singing the same, you experience also a high. I don't mean, attention, I don't mean that the Holy Spirit cannot be acting there. Yes. But it can happen like it happened to me, that I went to a retreat. I remember. And then I did experience emotional high. Why? Because there were many young people. And the music was beautiful. And they sing so well. And there was really so much emotion. So I got a high. Then what happened? That I was invited in the same city by another group. And in this group, mostly were not so young, old. And the music was not good. So I did not experience that high. You see? We tend to identify the high, the emotional high, with the spirit. That is wrong. And then we crave, we thirst, we look for it. And John is telling us, please, don't do that. Don't do that. Be quiet. Don't look for drama. Don't look for excitement. Because God is working in the soul in simplicity, in calm, very deep, even though you don't notice it. My dear friends, as you can see, this is an amazing and very interesting topic. And I'm sorry because I don't want to overrun, the time. So I pray that the Holy Spirit may enlighten you and I, you and me, so that we can understand, the wonder of the work of God in us, beyond our feelings and also beyond our reason, deep in the Spirit. This is the message of John, timeless, always for us. May God bless you. Hallelujah.